Thank you very much, everyone. Presentation coming up in a moment. There we go. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about stablecoins, cash, remittances. My name's George Harrap. I'm the CEO of a company called Bitspark. Bitspark, essentially, we were the first to do remittances about 6 years ago now. So we've been sending money around the world for quite a long time using only cryptocurrencies, no banks, no FX providers, entirely with crypto. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. But I guess a little bit of background as well about myself. I've been in Bitcoin for almost 9 years now. I bought my first Bitcoin at about $1.72. I was one of the first miners that got an FPGA, same with an ASIC. So I've sort of seen it as the whole life cycle. It's been a part of my day every single day for the last 9 years. So essentially what we wanted to do at Bitspark was to sort of build on sort of the evolution that we've seen with all these different platforms come along and try and make something really better. So essentially, what we do at Bitspark is we help people send money. And the primary way to send money around the world is cash. Fundamentally, cash. So physical pieces of paper and notes. When we're talking about the remittance world is about $700 billion around the world. It's growing at about 5-6% generally around the world. And cash is the primary mechanism. So even though a lot of sort of people will get up here and they'll go, oh, digital payments this, digital payments that, this company, this government is saying whatever with digital payments. It actually pales in comparison to the reality. And the reality is that A, cash is growing around the world. It's generally about 3% according to the BIS in circulation. And B, how people actually send money, about 95% of that is cash to cash. So they have to go somewhere with their cash. They put it somewhere, whether that's a money transfer company like a Western Union, it might be their local bank. But to actually extract it out at the other end in another country, it's usually always cash. So, we've been doing it for a long time. We're sort of moved from the world of using Bitcoin to make payments, which I'll talk a little bit about in a moment, and we're moving towards stablecoins. So we're going to sort of introduce that idea and why stablecoins might be a good way to be able to move cash around the world. But as I said, cash is everywhere. And this chart here, you might not be able to see some of the names at the bottom there, but essentially that's different regions of the world. And it's cash in circulation versus GDP over the last, I think it's 10 years or something like that. Basically, number goes up, right? So the number is going up. The amount of cash in circulation in the economy is actually growing. So even though a lot of central banks and a lot of governments around the world are trying to corral people into only using digital payments, and there's a bunch of reasons for that. Negative interest rates, if you have a negative interest rate and people have cash, they can't actually confiscate the money from you because the cash doesn't reduce at a negative rate. So they would much rather you use their digital currency. But the fact of the matter is that cash is really here to stay. So it's the largest payment method in circulation. On this graph in particular, India. India came into the news a couple of years ago when they banned some of the denominations of cash as well. So they banned some of the lower denominations that they didn't think really would impact too much people. Some people actually died trying to get their cash out at the other end and trying to make use of the money of which they had, which at a click of a finger is worth zero. So they had to queue up, they had to exchange it for something else. But even in India, 90% of the transactions in India, within the borders of India, is cash. So this is the reality, and if we want to really sort of solve digital payments and make payments easier and more accessible for the world and people to be able to be financially included in everything that they do, we need to address the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is everybody uses cash. So it doesn't matter if it's demonetization, digital disruption, this is sort of where we're at the moment. And sort of where we came into it was in 2014 when we did our remittance transaction. So we're based in Hong Kong, by the way. And essentially what we started was back then there wasn't really many exchanges. There wasn't, now the exchanges are everywhere, right? Everybody's an exchange. Back then there was only really like 4. So what we decided was that what we would do is we would collect the local cash currency in Hong Kong. We would buy Bitcoin with it. And then we would send that Bitcoin to a counterparty overseas who would then go and sell the Bitcoin for the local currency, cash, and they would go and distribute it. And that's fundamentally how remittances still work to this day with many of the remittance companies. There's only really about 5 remittance companies around the world that actually in reality do crypto remittances, and they're the same 5 which have existed for really the last 5 years. Most of them are in Asia, and we got BitPacer in Africa as well. But how the transaction works and why it's actually interesting is when you think about, well, how does money move? This is a big topic, but how does money move? Essentially, if you do it via a bank, your bank has to transact with another bank, right? They have to actually send a message to each other. That's what a SWIFT transfer is. It's just a message. It's some words. And these two banks look at those words and they go, oh, okay, Bank A, I'm going to debit my account with you and I'll increment the balance of Bank B, and then I'll be able to then distribute the money to person C or something like that. Now, that's great if the banks are connected together, but in many parts of the world, not everyone uses the same currency. In the case of Myanmar, Myanmar is a country where 2011, population 60 million, the banks were physically not connected to SWIFT. It was literally impossible to send money to Myanmar. So that's why people with suitcases full of cash, and that's still the predominant method of getting money across the border, that's how money moved. So SWIFT is all well and good if you have connections, if everybody uses the US dollar, but it's very easy to send the US dollar around the world, but you often can't actually extract US dollars in Myanmar or in Mali or in some country which has a local currency. So you need to be able to then convert that local currency, the US dollars, into the local currency. So how are you going to do that? Who's going to do that? Who's set up to do that? There's usually a couple of people around the world who are set up to do that, and it's usually Western Union, MoneyGram, these kind of people, because they're the only ones that generally have the license in these countries. So there's actually a barrier to entry. If you, as some fintech company that comes along with a great idea, and you're like, we're going to send money to Africa cheaper than all of the banks, and it's going to be wonderful. Yeah, okay, people need cash at the other end. That's fundamental. Number two, who's going to do that conversion at the other end? Who's going to distribute that? Your app is not going to do that, right? So who are you going to connect to actually do that? And generally, there's only like one or two people that can do that. So whatever the fintech might be, you're physically limited by the last mile problem. Essentially, the last mile is owned by generally the same people everywhere, and they're not going to give you a better rate than themselves. So, you're never really going to save money, like a TransferWise sending to Africa, because the people who are actually paying out at some country at the other end, they don't care if you're TransferWise or if you're Western Union or whoever. They literally own the cash dispersal in that country, so they're going to charge you $5 a pop every single time. So they don't care where the money comes from. So this system is sort of what we've got to break, right? And that's how crypto remittance actually adds some value, because you actually don't need to go through these gatekeepers. And in case of a Bitcoin transaction, you take some money at one end, you buy Bitcoin, and then you can have a counterparty at the other end who can sell that Bitcoin. Now, that relies on having a counterparty at the other end who will accept the Bitcoin. What's the market rate for Bitcoin in that currency? You might be right in thinking that this is only really a viable model in some countries, and that's correct, because not every country in the world has a local Bitcoin market of which you can go and sell that. And you might be thinking, well, what about these other cryptocurrencies? Well, none of them really work in any country ever. And that's because there's no local liquidity for those different currencies. So if you want to sell Ethereum in Indonesia, sorry, I mean, Ethereum's a great currency, but the main currency pair of Ethereum is Bitcoin. So what are you going to do? You're going to buy some Ethereum and then send it to Indonesia, and then the best route to convert that to rupiah is to convert the Ethereum back to Bitcoin, and then the Bitcoin to Indonesian rupiah. You should have just used Bitcoin to begin with. So essentially, what you've got to do is you've got to have a lot of these different partners in different locations, and they've got to be able to convert this currency. Now, that's all well and good, and that works in a majority of countries these days, and particularly some of the key remittance countries, often the big remittance countries. This is kind of a solved problem, is there generally is a lot of local cryptocurrency liquidity for that local currency. So you can sell it instantly, you can buy, you can sell, you can do that instantly. You don't have to really take any exchange rate risk on that because the order's executed within half a second, and by the way, there's no volatility within half a second. So that's kind of a solved problem there. But often what we run into is the local liquidity problem in different jurisdictions. So stablecoins is definitely sort of one way to solve that problem. In the case of, we have some people come to us sometimes, and we might have a money transfer company want to transact with us and come to me and they'll say, George, I'm in Sri Lanka, I'm a money transfer company, I like your software, I'd like to get set up. The thing is that if I go and send you Bitcoin in Sri Lanka, who's going to cash it out? There's no exchange there. There's no broker. There's no nothing. So essentially, there's a big impediment there, and I have to say, well, sorry, I can't have your business. But if you can make a rupee coin on a blockchain, a bit rupee, let's say, it means I can buy that digitally, and then essentially, if I can buy that 100 rupee, and then I can give it to you, and then say, hey, can you please go and pay 100 rupee to this other guy, you're not taking any exchange rate risk on that. So essentially, you can pay out rupee in physical cash to the guy at the other end who's conducting the remittance transaction. You can pay him out in physical cash, and you can receive rupee in your digital account. Now that's valuable because you don't want Bitcoin, you don't want US dollars, you don't want any other currency that's not rupee, because that's your exposure there. You're exposed. If you get any other currency other than rupee, you're taking a risk. So essentially, having a stablecoin very much helps in that respect. In the case of some of the digitization of the different currencies we have around the world, another interesting one, we did a project with the UN a couple of years ago in Tajikistan. The Tajik Samoni is a currency which is not globally liquid, shall we say. The Tajik Samoni is also a currency of which 2 banks collapsed in that country, and everyone lost their money. Right? So if you had a digital balance in a bank, sorry, you woke up one day and you just lost all your money. And that currency is very hard to access. So you can't really call up HSBC and say, hey, HSBC, can I please have a multi-currency account with Tajik Samoni? Because it doesn't exist. So being able to create these different cryptocurrencies, these stablecoins on a blockchain very much helps. And it's really the ability to create them for almost free. You can create 150 different digital currencies on a blockchain pretty much for free. Anybody can do it anywhere in the world. Doesn't really cost you anything. But then the question comes, how are they collateralized? So when we're talking about non-USD stablecoins, we have the sort of elephant in the room in the stablecoin world is Tether. Tether went from $0 to $4 billion in assets under management in a couple of years. It's the largest stablecoin, it still is. It's denominated in US dollars. There's a number of other US dollar stablecoins around the world. But generally, I see the biggest opportunity in digitizing these currencies which are hard to access, like the Tajik Samoni, like the Sri Lankan rupee. These are the ones which are hard. This is the ones which are not connected to anything. These are the ones where, actually, if you can provide a value proposition that you can make these currencies, you can transact with them almost for free, that cuts out so many middlemen in that whole process. So this is where we see the growth. And you can see that some of the largest market cap non-USD stablecoins are things like BitCNY, BitEuro, by BitShares. BitShares is one of the sponsors of this conference, so that's been around for about 5 years now. So these coins have existed for 5 years, right? No government issued them, no regulation, no anything. It just happened, and a bunch of random people on the internet started using it. And there's nothing anybody can do to really stop that. So it doesn't matter who you are, there's nothing you can do to stop that, which I think is great because it allows innovation in whatever country, whatever currency you might be in the world. So we see that these are really the opportunity in these exotic currencies. In the case of the remittance world, the remittance world is kind of in a race to zero at the moment. So you'll often see that people go, well, oh, it's so expensive to send money overseas, it's 10%. And you'll see in the media, they'll go, Western Union's charging 10% to send to Nigeria. It couldn't be further from the truth. The actual cost of sending to Nigeria in many of the liquid remittance corridors is probably about 0.5%, if that. And nobody makes any money on that. And by the way, the Nigerian banking system is actually very good. You can trace transactions real time, you can look them up, and you can do real-time payments within the day. So actually, examples like that of remittance sort of use cases are, maybe you shave a few more basis points off a 0.5% fee, but it's not really going to change the world. So what really is going to change the world is having liquidity in all of these different currencies, these different exotic currencies around the world, and being able to transact with them. In the case of, like Nigeria and Ghana, for example, 2 countries, very close to each other geographically, the fee for exchanging them between each other, 25%. Doesn't go through USD, but that's the fee of generally you have a suitcase full of cash and you go and exchange it with some guy by the side of the road. That's the only way that you do it. So essentially, if you can do that digitally on a blockchain, instantly for free, then you can cut out a lot of those middlemen, you can provide a lot of efficiencies, and you can use things other than the US dollar and the euro to transact. Because often, if you need to transact in those currencies, you have to go via USD and via euro, and that can be quite expensive. So we really see stablecoins as the future. The collateralization of stablecoins often can depend on a trusted party, can depend on crypto itself, but that's really where we see the future. So thank you very much. Happy to answer any questions. Let me know.